and members of the school district administration, including Dr. Christy Howard, Superintendent, Dr. Eric Flam, Director of Teaching and Learning, Mrs. Dawn Harris, Director of People Services, Mrs. Diane Skornavaki, Director of Human Resources, and Mr. Brian Fike, who serves as a business administrator as well as our board secretary. We will not be amending the agenda tonight, so on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Haller.
Thank you, Dr. Herring. Everyone has heard the saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Tonight I'd like to share with the board and the community a shortened version of the presentation of the first day of school. And it's our hope that our video tells the story of a community that's excited to be back in school with our teachers, our administrators, our students, and of course some smiling faces of parents. I know that I was very excited to have my second grader return back to school as well. So Joe Way, I think Joe's in the closet, so Joe, could you share that? I'd like to thank everyone for such a great start for the beginning of the school year. Our parents have been amazing. Again, so excited to have their kids back in school, of course, where they belong. All of our administrators who have worked very hard all summer to make sure that we had a great beginning of the school year opening, as well as all the people that are behind the scenes, our custodians, our transportation, all the work that goes into that. Moving close to 4,000 students around a district of this size is no easy task. Ben Bernhardt and his team of bus drivers do an amazing job, and I certainly wanted to highlight their work, and as well as everyone else, our cafeteria workers, our aides. So thank you to everyone, and we're looking forward to an amazing school year this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Haller. We'll now be moving to public comment relating to tonight's agenda, in which we'll be following board policy number 903 regarding public participation in board meetings. I'd like to emphasize that each statement made by a participant shall be limited to 4 minutes duration. At the 4-minute mark, I would ask that your statement be wrapped up quickly. First commenter will be Mary McSurdy. Okay, all right, thank you. Okay. Then we can move on from there to the Education Committee, Mr. Fiddler.
Thank you, Dr. Herring. Just one item, conference requests. It is recommended that the Board of School Directors approve the following list of staff conferences. There are 4 there. Pretty straightforward. And not much money.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
And that's the end of my report.
Thank you, Mr. Fiddler. Personnel Committee, Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Dr. Herring. It is recommended the Board of School Directors approves or ratifies the following changes of status. Under certified staff, A through H. Under support staff, A through F. Under certified substitutes, A through D. Under guest teachers, A through C.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
It is recommended the Board of School Directors approves or ratifies the following changes of status for change of status B. Certified staff A and B, support staff A through D.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Under Subject C, it is recommended the Board of School Directors approves or ratifies the following leaves of absence. Leave of absence A.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Under Subject D, it is recommended the Board of School Directors approves or ratifies the following resignations under Administrative Staff A and under Support Staff A and B.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Under Subject E, Retirement, it is recommended the Board of School Directors approves or ratifies the following retirements. It's under Support Staff A.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Just like to thank Mrs. High, for 16 years of service to the district, and wish her well in her retirement.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
That's the end of my report. Thank you, Dr. Herring.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Finance, Facilities, and Audit Committee, Mr. Mel.
Yes, starting off with item A, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors exonerates the penalty and interest for the 2020 school real estate tax for the following parcel number. The principal amount to be paid, principal acknowledging the misspelling. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carried.
Item number B, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors vote on and accept the settlement offer of $8,150,000 MV for the 2021, 2022, and 2023 tax year on the following docket number: Exeter Real Estate Company versus Burks County BOAA. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
It is recommended that the Board of School Directors vote on and accept the settlement offer of $5,450,000 MV for the 2021, 2022, and 2023 tax year on the following docket number: Berks County Real Estate Associates, LLP versus Berks County BOAA.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
By your hearing, that's it for my committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Mel. This takes us to public comments. Is there anyone in the public that would like to be heard right now? No? Okay, would anybody on the board like to be heard? No? Okay. I believe that concludes our September special voting meeting. I declare the meeting adjourned. We'll now continue to our Wednesday, September 7th, 2022 Exeter Township School District Committee of a Whole meeting. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Fike, can you take roll call again?
Dr. Ann Herring,
Present.
John Fiddler,
Here.
Dr. Andrea Battler,
Here.
Dr. David Hemberger,
Here.
Jason Mell,
Here.
Timothy Morgan,
Here.
Robert Quinter, Julia Schaefer,
Here.
Allison Wilson,
Here.
all present.
Thank you, Mr. Fike. In addition to the 9 board members in attendance this evening, we're also joined at the board table by our solicitor, Sean Lockager, and members of the school district administration, including Dr. Christy Haller, superintendent, Dr. Eric Flam, director of teaching and learning, Mrs. Dawn Harris, director of pupil services, Mrs. Diane Skornavaki, director of human resources, and Brian Fike, who serves as our business administrator, as well as our board secretary. Okay, the meeting minutes are attached. Does anyone have any changes or discussion they would like to make regarding the meeting minutes for the August 2nd, 2022 Board Committee of a Whole meeting and Board Special Voting meeting, as well as August 16th Board Voting meeting?
Just have a spelling correction pointing out on the August 16th board meeting for the public commenter. McSurdy, pages 2 and 12, I believe is spelled incorrectly. Should be MCSURDY.
Thank you, Mr. Mel. Okay. We will not be amending tonight's agenda. We'll be going on to the Education Committee. Mr. Fiddler.
Thank you, Dr. Herring. The first item, which we will be moving on to the voting meeting, I'll read the motion and we'll be voting tonight. It's recommended that the Board of School Directors approve a statement of work, Berks County Intermediate Unit, Form ESL, English as a Second Language curriculum work, the Exeter Township School District, per the attached agreement. I'm wondering if we could have Dr. Heller, someone just give us a 2-minute grill on this.
Sure. I'm actually going to have Dr. Bland speak to this.
Okay.
Since it falls under.
Yes, Mr. Fiddler, thank you. This is an agreement with the BCIU for their ESL specialists to work with our ESL teachers to develop curriculum and a thorough program for our ESL students. This is money that was built into the Title III grant for this purpose, $1,500 for professional development curriculum and $300 for consultation.
Is this something we do every year?
No, it isn't. It was built into the grant this past year. Typically, we build some money in for professional development in Title III. In this past year, most likely because of the coming off of COVID and making sure that we're up to speed with our ESL programming, we wanted some professional development consultation with the IU.
Thank you. Other questions from colleagues? All right, item B, actually we'll do B and C, 2 tuition agreements, both with New Story. Pretty straightforward. Mrs. Harris, could you say just a word or two about these?
Renewals for out-of-district placements.
Item D, tuition agreement with Elwyn Opportunity School. Is that a similar?
That's actually a move-in student who was already in an out-of-district placement who will continue there based on need.
Great, thank you. Item E, Horton Gillingham tutoring contract. Looks familiar. Conference requests. There are 4 of those.
Could I just make just a comment about the conference request? Could we, when we have transportation costs, could we also include in the request or in the documentation the location where the event is going to be held? I think we may have done that in the past, but it would be helpful to understand that, let's say, the extent of the transportation costs when we know where they're actually holding the event. Is that something we could add to the agenda?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Item G, field trips within the 60-mile radius. Looks like most of these are for the senior high marching band, one for Exeter is going to host SAT testing, and the student council hosting a homecoming parade and bonfire in October. And item H, field trips beyond the 60-mile radius. Just one senior high school creative expressions, World Lit and British Lit, will travel to the Pennsylvania Renaissance Fair on October 5th to attend and participate in activities for Student Day. And we'll move that ahead for voting. Next, we have 2 settlement agreements, actually three settlement agreements and releases, which we will move ahead to the voting meeting in 2 weeks. Is there anything that we can say, Mrs. Harris, just in a very general way? Item L, agreement with Richard J. Karen Foundation. Could we say something about that? Well, my first question is this the first time you're doing this, or is this something?
No, long-standing relationship with the Karen Foundation.
Okay.
As all districts do in the county. They provide student assistance programs for Berks County, and they provide all of our drug and alcohol assessments for students, mental health assessments, referrals for mental health treatment. Additionally, they assist us with running small groups based on permission from parents for various issues related to behavioral and emotional health. They additionally administer different curriculum for us related to substance abuse and substance abuse prevention.
Thank you. Questions from the board?
Mrs. Harris, are these personnel deployed primarily at secondary, or is there any elementary service for SAT?
There is. So we have one full-time person coming from Karen that will cover junior high and senior high this year. And then we have another person who's coming 4 days a week to cover the 3 elementary buildings and Rifton.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? And finally, item M, a transportation agreement, which we will move ahead to the voting meeting in 2 weeks. It is recommended that the Board of School Directors approve an agreement between Cottage 7 Academy and Exeter Township School District to provide transportation for a student during the upcoming school year, actually the existing school year, at a per diem rate of $38 a day for a total of $6,840. Questions? None. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Fiddler. Okay. Personnel Committee, Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Dr. Herring. First thing on the list, subject A, is the revision of the job description for the Assistant Superintendent. And I'd like to ask Dr. Haller if she could give a update on why we decided to make these changes from the administration.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share. So most districts in Berks County do have an assistant superintendent. We're one of the few that does not. And Exeter is a rather large school district. We have over 3,800 students. The way the organizational chart is currently in the school district is that everyone reports, all administrators ultimately report to the superintendent, which really dilutes the span of control over accountability among administration, because there needs to be a level of support that we're providing for our administrators. This also became very apparent when the previous superintendent resigned and there was no clear direction as to who the second person was in charge. And so by having an assistant superintendent, it's part of my recommendation. Not that I'm intending on leaving here anytime soon, because obviously I love Exeter and this is my home. But I do feel that as though it's the responsibility of the superintendent to set the school district up in the best position that it can possibly be in. And part of that is making sure that when the superintendent is not available, that there is a clear person in charge of the district. So that is part of the my reason for recommending that we bring back the assistant superintendent position. However, obviously finance is always a top priority, and making sure that we're fiscally responsible. So in keeping to that, I did not want to, or feel it was necessary, add another position to the organization. I felt as though that like other school districts, particularly Kutztown, where they have an assistant superintendent, their assistant superintendent is the person that handles special education, 504s, and that was more of the model that I was seeking to replicate, where they have their assistant superintendent stay in that role, but is an assistant superintendent, and then like we have here, have a director of teaching and learning. So that was my intent with adding that position and really changing the position.
Thank you, Dr. Heller. A couple comments. First of all, in relation to what you said, in reviewing the job description, one of the things I noticed that it was not, one of the bullet points is actually not in here, where if in the absence of the superintendent, that the assistant superintendent would take that place, even if it's for the short interim. Is it possible that we can have that added, just to have clarity on the job description?
Sure, absolutely.
Second thing is, in reviewing the two job descriptions between Director of Teacher and Learning and Assistant Superintendent of Student Services, I did notice that position goals, as well as the second bullet point on both of the job descriptions, are very similar. Not saying that that's wrong, just wanted to know if we could have some clarity, if there's overlap, if they help each other. I know that the Assistant Superintendent says assist with the management of, but the Director of Teaching and Learning says develops, oversees, and manages. So, and then the bullet point, the second bullet point for both of them are the same. I just wanted to know if, why that is, or if that was intentional.
It is intentional because Mrs. Harris will still oversee special education, and special education programming is different than our regular education programming. So some of the assessments that we use and that we look at as far as the way that we benchmark students has been different in the past. So some of the programming that she is in charge of, or the Director of Pupil Services has been in charge of in the past, has been different than our regular education programming. So that does make a difference between the Director of Teaching and Learning and Special Education. Also, with the Director of Teaching and Learning, they handle more of the teacher side with the development of what the curriculum looks like, whereas special ed, they follow that with either making accommodations or modifications to the programming so that it is accessible for our special education students. So they will work as partners, but their jobs are different.
Thank you. With permission from the board, I'd like to ask that bullet point be added before we bring it to vote in 2 weeks.
My microphone will not shut off.
Okay, if there's no other discussion, B is we'll be moving to the voting meeting. That is approval of the contract, a new extended contract for the business manager. Is there any discussion on that? And then C will be the approval of the contract of the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services, which will be Ms. Dawn Harris. Any discussion?
No, I just wanted to point out then Mrs. Harris will have her own contract and will no longer be a member of Act 93.
That's correct.
Dr. Herring, that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Finance, Facilities, and Audit Committee, Mr. Mel.
Yes, kicking us off with item A is the Greenworks proposal. I do believe we have both Quandel Energy Solutions and Greenworks in the audience. Is that correct, Brian?
Yes.
I did want to just fill in the board, and I know there's been a lot of different business names, LLCs being thrown around, and I just want to clarify. Quandel is the energy engineering firm that was hired last year through a competitive bid to run some of the HVAC projects. So I think a lot of the consulting or questions were run through them, I believe. Is that correct, Mr. Fike?
Yeah, Quandell's our employee or our employer.
Under our
contractor. They
Yes.
work for us.
So, and then the two other business names that have been associated with the presentation that we're about to see here, Solar Renewable Energy LLC. They're engineers for Greenworks Development, and Greenworks Development, that business is actually the solar developer chosen for the proposal. And as we get into the contract, there was another name that was presented, the Exeter Township SD Solar Partners LLC. That is a special purpose entity, and it's comprised of the investors who would actually own the project until the district purchases it. So I want to get that out of the way so everybody knows. So I believe.
Did you, there was a lot of questions that were sent in. We said we'd give them answers. Did you want to read those off and the answers?
We can. I think we can address them as we have discussion.
Okay.
I can go through them. Yeah.
So Joe, do you want to pull up the presentation? And we have, sorry, Seth from Greenworks and Ron Smalls from Greenworks, and I also have Sherry Lescavage from Laura Savage. I'm gonna put you that every time. From Quandell's here. So, do you want to take it from here, Seth or Ron? I think I just wanted, the last meeting, we'll go over what was proposed in the last meeting for the raise. And there was questions about not using WASH. So there's an option 2. When we get to that, you'll see it will not produce the electric we need because it's not close enough to Lorraine, so we can't cover Lorraine School. But we can increase the size at a watt, but not cover Lorraine School. It's not within the 2-mile radius. So if you look at proposal 1, we're looking at 110% of our electric usage, and proposal 2 is only at 100% because it's 10% on everything else except Lorraine. But we can get into that. I'm sorry if I already jumped ahead.
No, we cut our presentation down for a little bit. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be back with you again. We took some of the conversations that we had last time, discussions back and forth. I'm Ron Tomas, by the way, with Greenworks Development, and brought together, put them together and brought another proposal. I'd like to introduce Seth Berry, who is one of the leads with our partnership with Solar Renewable Energy in the implementation. And Seth would actually be the project manager for this if we want to go ahead with this. And has been working with the administration looking at various options. So
thank you, Ron. As Brian had suggested, we do have the 2 options here that we summarized. The first option is on the screen currently. We can talk through both of those. The first option here is basically what was originally presented. Essentially, we're going to have solar array proposed at the watt at right within the district office here. And as Brian mentioned, you're looking at about a 5.6 megawatt the second slide. I'll go back. Here's the other option, just as an aesthetic and ground space consideration, and that was raised in the last conversation. This is option 2. Basically, there's only solar being proposed at Watt and Reichman. So the Delta District Office is not included in this proposal. What you will notice, though, too, is a Watt is a bigger site. There is solar being proposed on the eastern side, which is very green. So a Watt is a much bigger array here proposed in option 2. This one is a 5.1 megawatt size array. It'll be a 100% offset of the usage, so it'll be about 70% smaller. Again, that was 5.6 megawatts in option 1 versus 5.1 in option 2. Next slide, that'll summarize.
I apologize for interrupting. You were on it. In regards to the Wanton site, why was that small part removed in the front of the Wanton crater with the second one?
Yep. So as that would just leaving the future development plans involved, like that was probably one of the options there if you wanted to leave some space. From a landscape perspective, the eastern side, it's extremely hilly, so there's definitely no development opportunity there from the school. And then the western side, that's a little bit more of a flatter piece. Just trying to help centralize the array, trying not to have like a, say, 200-foot gap in between the solar on the front side and then a pretty big gap, and then having the rest of that towards the back. That was basically the consideration there for a lot of other options versus 2.
I have objected to utilizing the large field at Whatton since I first saw this. I've been told that there is no need to develop any further school buildings because someone was talking about reducing. Well, with the occupancy rate right now at around 90% for all of our buildings, I have presented to y'all a residential activity report which cites the number of homes sold in the last year, which is 427, 256 or 60 of those were 3 bedrooms or more. That means kids. We also have pending, as of right now, as of the 3rd, I will apologize for that, another 413 sales. Again, we have 58 in the 1 to 2 bedroom category, and the remainder of those are 3 bedrooms or above. I think utilizing that land, which we own there at Owatton, for this, when we have the potential of using on the east side, is just it's derelict. I mentioned last time how much an acre of land is going for. We were able to find 2 sites that satisfied a 20-acre requirement. There is no more land. With the township zoning laws, we only had 2 options on where to build Whatton, and because the township wanted us to build it, wanted to kick Greth out of building his. We were finagled into taking the Owatton where we wanted to build it on a more widely dispersed. There's one other site. It's got an electric line running, a high tension wire running through it at cost of about $1 million to put that high tension wire underground. Unless the township changes its zoning, we cannot buy any more land adequate to put a school on. I know developing on the east side of Owatton results in less money coming back to us, and I think it's about $500,000 more expensive. We had originally looked at that eastern portion as a site for some other development, and we ended up having to terrace, which is an extremely expensive process to put any buildings on it. So what I'm saying is, if we can put those solar panels on the eastern side of Owatton, yes, it's going to cost a little more, and we're going to lose a little money in the process, but it will be cheaper in the long run for us if we have to build any other facility. As I said, we're 90% thereabout occupancy, and we've got 840 home sales, 890 home sales, either pending or closed in the last year. So to say that we will never have to build another building, we have no plans now. But to say we're never going to have to do it, I think is foolhardy. We have been, I carry insurance in case I get sick. Well, I don't intend to get sick, but darn it, it may happen. And, so that's why you carry insurance. Using this land for the solar array to provide additional funding, I understand that. But if you're going to spend more than we're going to save in the additional funding to get more land to satisfy future requirements, you're throwing it on board, and they're not going to have any way of responding. So I consider it almost irresponsible to put future boards in that situation.
Thank you, Mom.
Sorry, Seth, I think we're okay to continue with the presentation.
Yeah, the next slide is just summarizing the two options. Just as on one slide here, so we're showing the total system size, again with the system sizes by location, your offset, and then your projected 4-year savings for the district. Obviously with the 110% proposal, it's going to yield more savings. Again, one decision that was also, so there's kind of two things. One is the utilization of the lot, and then the utilization of the district office here. That's basically the two main deltas between option 1 and 2.
How do we provide 100% power to the district in option number 2 if we're not providing any power to Lorraine?
Yeah, so you're actually able to oversize the system. So essentially, you're going to be doing like 110% on everything that's not Lorraine. So that's why, like in option 1, we're able to get to 110% offset. So essentially, everything else except for Lorraine is operating at 110%. So Lorraine is roughly at 10%.
And theoretically, you would be able to sell that 10% back to the grid and hopefully make up your difference from how much you're paying for Lorraine on the grid.
Correct. Yes. You'd be selling it back to Meta. Correct.
And do we have approximate numbers of what that market savings would be?
That's included in those cash flows for 4-year savings.
But not by year.
If you go into the cash flow, there's a breakout on year 1 versus year 2 versus year 3
Okay.
or 4 year.
Thank you.
We have another slide.
Pretty much just contact information.
Questions, discussion?
I have a question about, not about the presentation, but an email we received on August 22nd from a expert in solar energy, and he has quite a list of questions and suggestions that he thinks we ought to consider. I just wonder if we're going to consider those.
Those questions were from a construction consultant, and those were taken into account and answered. Yep. Yep.
Okay, which one is it? Wandell?
Are we going to share this with the community? Are we going to attach this?
One of the questions I had was, have we done an audit of our current system? So if you look at page 11 of our contract, the proposed contract, the last line, which is in parentheses, says, to be clear, any costs in excess of ordinary interconnection and upgrade costs, parenthesis, such as upgrades needed by the host utility for interconnection and or to make the host's commercial electrical system safe to operate, shall be borne by host customer unless expressly accepted in writing by the system owner. I have not seen that in writing, and according to the questions, the assumption would be that the out-of-pocket cost to the district would only be in these first 6 years, besides for the service fee, the increase in the insurance. Do we have a guarantee that there's not going to be any out-of-pocket fees to connect the interconnect?
In the proposal is a 200,000 interconnection fee. The contract is really in the beginning phases, but they need a contract to be able to go to Med-Ed, because Med-Ed will not speak to them directly because they're not the owner of the property. They have to negotiate the interconnection fee with Med-Ed. So we sort of, as 22, you need a contract that yes, they are our people, unless we want to pay for our own people. But I'm trying to not create any expenses. So, but there is in the contract 200,000, up to 200,000.
So I understand that, but it actually says here that this is not part of that, right? It says, to be clear, any costs in excess of ordinary interconnection and upgrades, such as upgrades needed by host utility for interconnection, are going to be on our expense. So I'm wondering, have we done an audit of our system to find out what those in excess of ordinary interconnection and upgrade costs might be?
No, we haven't. I know Sharon has addressed these before when she was here, but
I can speak to that just a little bit more to add a little bit of color to it.
Please.
So the first part of the process, after we have a contract, we're going to be, as Brian mentioned, we would be submitting to Med-Ed for an interconnection study. So that would be done 2 or 3 different times, depending on if we're talking at Brighton, a lot, district office, so forth. That is the first part of the process. So basically, the utility will do a study. It takes a couple of months. They come back. They're going to tell you that the fee is very minimal, or the fee could be a little bit larger. The 200,000 in the contract, that is our estimate of what a reasonable number is. If you read in that same paragraph of the contract, it basically says in there that if the fee is in excess of the 200,000, either party may cancel the contract. So if, for example, if Med-Ed comes back and it's 500,000, we can either eat the $300,000 excess or walk away. Same thing with the district. So there's no obligation to the district if the fees are unreasonable.
How much does the system cost? Like, how much is it going to cost the service company to install this system?
The actual utility?
Mm-hmm.
That's our estimate. It's not 200,000. Because there's a couple different.
No, I'm talking about the whole package. For you guys to come in and put this entire thing in,
yep. What
is it going to cost you?
It's probably in the range of, I'd say $9 to $10 million in total, somewhere around there.
Okay. So I'm having a hard time because we're going to buy it. We're looking at possibly buying the system in year 6, I believe.
Correct.
For, find it. Anybody have that on hand? Was it 6.9 or something like that? Is that correct? So about $7 million to buy the system, and over the first 6 years, we're gonna, in service fees, spend close to $4 million. So we're looking at having you guys install a $10 million system. But at the end of the day, if the district installed it and financed it, it would cost us almost the same. Is that correct?
We could do the assessment of showing you if you owned it day one versus under the PSA model. Historically, what we've found is it's more cost effective for us to own it and sell it to you in year 6 at that discounted price.
And why is that?
So I'll have to get you the actual numbers of the cost, but essentially we're able to monetize tax credits and depreciation as part of our return as the owner of the system. So we're monetizing the cash payments from you, that buyout value if you exercise it, and then the tax benefits. All of that yields into our minimum return thresholds. That because of those federal tax benefits that we're able to claim, that's why it's a more attractive solution for the district.
Because of the tax credit, right, and the depreciation value.
Correct.
And that's what helps the investors. I mean, because the investors have to make money as well, I would assume, right?
Correct. Yes.
But at the end of the day, we would have to. You're saying because of interest. So essentially, if and I'm not saying we do, if we had $10 million cash today, and we spent $10 million on the system, it would essentially be a wash, as opposed to having the investors do it.
We can do the analysis to show you what it would look like if the district owned it up front. Again, I was just talking high level. I don't have numbers.
Okay.
But that's the assessment.
My last comment. Could we go back one slide? When we show 40-year cost savings, I just want to be clear. This savings is if you installed the system versus if we stayed on the grid, correct?
Correct.
So if I did my math correctly, if we install the system, and based on the last 5 years, which I think we averaged, if I looked at the last 5 years average, we were somewhere in the vicinity of, I have it written down here, I apologize, $662,259 is the average of the last 5 years of our electric bills. If we looked at that plus the amount we're going to spend, the actual savings, we don't actually see a savings until year 21, I believe. That's when we actually see savings to the district. So I understand what you're saying here, that the savings is installing the system versus not installing the system, staying on the grid. But the fact is, just to be clear to everybody listening, that it's not like we're going to, in the next 40 years, get a $29.2 million credit. This is going to be over that amount of time that we're going to see that savings.
It's basically reducing your electricity costs each year, is essentially what it's doing.
Correct.
The one thing I will note, I think you were quoting your average electricity costs the last 5 years. I'm sure everybody's seen it at their house. PPL, Med-Ed, all of the electric utilities, they're up basically double. So those same numbers, if you did that analysis 5 years, the next 5 years at current levels, you're looking at probably closer to about 1.2 million with average electricity spend.
And with all the research you guys do, and with all the new talk in the government, do you think that there's a chance that sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, that if a district wanted to install this on their own, that they'd be given equal breaks in order to do that? I mean, right now we're not afforded those tax credits, but do you think that there will be some kind of a credit if a district in the next 5 to 10 years? What is the research telling you?
So there was a recent federal bill that just came out in August this year, the IRA, or the Inflation Reduction Act. So that solidified solar's place in the United States here for the next 10 years. So I'm not expecting any new policy in the next 10 years. But it's a pretty long footprint. We're talking about federal policy for a 10-year outcome.
Okay. And Quandel, is that the same that you're hearing as well? You don't see the state or the federal government giving relief to districts or government entities that want to go to alternative energy to install it on their own?
Thank you.
To the board, this is my last statement. My biggest concern here is that there's some holes in this contract that I think remain unanswered. I also think that we really don't have an accurate depiction of what the out-of-pocket cost is going to be. I do not have a hard time believing that if we move forward with this, that it is only going to cost us the insurance upgrade and the service fee in the first year. It seems to me that through all of this, we're going to find things that we have to invest in, and I'm not saying that we can or we shouldn't. I think alternative energy is good. I think we have to continue to look at it. However, for me at least, until we get some proper documentation of what that looks like, I'd have a hard time moving forward with this contract at this time.
Mr. Morgan, I'd just like to just a comment regarding that. I did have an opportunity to speak to some of the other school districts that have worked with Greenworks and have put in place similar systems. And the thing I consistently heard was great investment, a very smooth operation, and very true to what they said. Minimal or almost no out-of-pocket costs for the school district upon installation. So, while you may have a hard time pulling that out of the contract itself, I think in other districts where they've had very similar contracts, and you guys know what you've done throughout the state so far, there really haven't been any surprises or anything unexpected outside of what was actually portrayed in the initial presentation. Essentially, no out-of-district and no district costs. Just my and that's a very kind of cursory reaction to that. It's not detail. It's not going into the contract and trying to pull out what are some of the potential issues here. But I think these contracts are fairly consistent from district to district. I would imagine there's not a whole lot of variability. So what we've seen with other districts, I think we could expect as well.
Dr. Hamburger, maybe you could explain then, if we did approve this contract, is there a point in which we say we have to stop and vote again to say we've done all the research, we've gotten the permits, we have all the numbers, now there's a second approval process for them to break ground? Or would this just be free-flowing until someone brought it up in a meeting and we decided to review it again?
Not sure if I fully understand. I mean, are you saying that we would kind of take this like one step at a time and not necessarily in its entirety approve this contract and get them going with it, or you are looking at some preliminary steps in the way?
Well, it seems to me that the holes that I'm seeing, everyone's saying we really can't fill those holes in until we take the next step with the process. But I want to be given the opportunity, if we're allowed, it wouldn't be in breach of contract for us to say, after we have all the information that's required for them to move forward with this, for us to say, well, now that you've given us all the information, before we continue with this contract and break the ground, that we'd like to make a final decision before we move forward. What I'd be afraid of is that we've talked about fencing, and there are a lot of line items that aren't specifically laid out in this contract, which I think should be, and a lot of that information, I think everyone keeps saying, well, we'll know that once we know it. Well, once we know it, I'd like to have the opportunity to come back and say, now that we have all the information, yes, you can move forward, or at this time we're not interested.
Yeah, I just wonder if you can go into any more specifics in terms of what some of the holes are that you're alluding to, things that maybe don't make sense to you.
I think some of the concern that Mr. Morgan is mentioning is potential cost overruns, because there's just things that we don't know in terms of the connectivity, that things that we could potentially find out by further investigation.
Is that something you guys could speak to at all?
Sure. Yeah, I think the only thing that's really out of our control is really that utility interconnection upgrade fee. It's basically MedEd, obviously they have a monopoly here, so they can essentially assess it. Most times it's a reasonable fee, which we think 200,000 is a reasonable fee. Again, it could come in at like 500,000, and at that point the district and the owner of the system have to negotiate if we agree to just walk away, or someone renegotiates the terms. I think if you also reached out to any of our prior contacts, they also would share the same thing, that there's no extra cost for fencing, hit rock in the fields. There's no extra cost. It's really the interconnection fee is the only thing that we really don't have control over. And I mean, we stand by our word that we have a contract with the district, and this is our proposal to the district as part of the long-term agreement.
I think some of the concern though is that that isn't in the contract, such as the fencing. So, and I'm not saying anybody would lie or anything like that, but it would be prudent for the board to have that in the contract, to have exactly what you just said. If there are
Absolutely.
issues with fencing, there are no costs, and the fencing is included with the price.
Yeah, I think if I remember right, one of your answers was fencing and screenings if required by the borough or township, right?
So I think, again, we're looking at making a $10 million investment as a district. It's going to last 40 years that I probably won't live to see the end of. For us to say that let's revise the contract and bring it to vote in 14 days, I personally think that every time we revise a contract that it needs to come back to a committee meeting for us to review it and have another discussion on. And if the contract isn't locked in the way it is right now, then I personally don't see that we should bring this to a voting meeting. We should see the revisions and have the opportunity to review it and have those discussions again. That's
Can I
my thoughts.
make one comment? When you keep on talking 10 million, you're including the 3.3 service contract, or contract service payments. That's actually, we'll be, and they're going to be electric provider. We will not be paying Med Ed. We're going to be paying them for electric for that first 5 years. So either we pay them or we pay Med Ed. So I really don't think you can include that 3.3 million because you're going to be paying that no matter what.
You mean the service fee?
The service fee, yeah, that covers the electric.
No, I understand that.
Yeah, so when
10
you
million
say 10 million,
right.
we're looking at 7 million, really.
Well, sure, but at the end of the day, I mean,
But like you said, 3.3, we're going to be paying to Med Ed or to them. So it doesn't matter.
We're gonna
pay
that cost to
Yeah.
some.
So
Right.
When you're saying 10 million, it's actually 7.
7 million after the
Yeah.
the term.
Yep.
Correct. But at the end of the day, once we make the decision to go down this road, we're still paying a service fee, and we have to be happy with the work. And this isn't, and really, this 6.9 million is an early termination fee, right? I mean, am I correct in saying that the market value of this could potentially be $10 million in 5 years, and we just don't know?
Yeah, that exhibit you're referring to in the back of the contract, we add that for more clarity for the district, basically, so you know what you're going to be paying for the system. That is a little bit of a catch-22. For us to actually sell the system to you, it is supposed to be at fair market value. That is one thing that we have to basically sell the system for. We believe that 6.9 million in year 6 is the fair market value for the system. So that's our intent, is we're selling that to you at fair market value.
However, if the fair market value is 4 million, we still owe you 6.9.
As part of how that's structured, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
As another suggestion, if you would rather do it this way, we could delete that schedule and just leave it as we would sell it to you at fair market value. How it's presented in the contract is fair market value is basically a third-party determined appraisal for discounted cash flows on the system's value.
So then what would be the benefit of having this schedule?
It's just more clarity for you, so that way you know what the system purchase price is. But if you would like that deleted, that's actually been pretty well received as clarity on what the costs are.
I think it's good clarity to have the schedule. I just don't know that it's good clarity to have in a contract if we find out that it depreciates more, it's worth 4 million, and we still have to pay 7 for it because that's what we signed in the contract.
Yeah, I don't have the full contract here in front of me, but I do believe there was a provision in there that we could have a third-party appraisal.
There is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
Sharon insists on that because she's hoping that the price of panels will go down in years, so it actually would go down in value.
my recommendation that I did make to Mrs. Montaigne was that it should be fair market value, not to exceed that amount, but particularly the schedule, if that's causing us to lock in at a particular price, I'd rather not Mr. Morgan, was there anything else that you had a question or discussion about?
No, I mean, the only thing that always lingers on my mind is we're at the highest inflation we've seen in a long time. Supply chain is very hard to get things. We saw when we built the bus garage by waiting X amount of time, how much more it cost us. And I guess I know everything's always a gamble, but my question is, if we do see the bell curve go down, is this project going to be, is it going to be a lot less expensive to do this project in 4 years as opposed to doing it today when we're looking at the inflation we're seeing? I don't know, Quantel, if you could tell us what you're seeing in projections, supply chain, cost of goods. You can pretty much get what you get right now. There's not a lot of choice. So what are you seeing?
Correct. Our most recent example we're finishing up at the end of this year is for Central Columbia School District in Williamsburg. That was what contract that was signed at the end of last year. It was in December, with the same concerns there, that there was supply chain limitations, price hikes, tariffs on equipment, all that's pretty much equally the same as what we have right now. We're on track to deliver that project by the end of the year. That was the intended goal back in December. Basically about a 1 year turnaround. We're pretty close to meeting that mark. If you swing by Central Columbia's campus right now, we certainly send you a couple drone pictures if you'd like to see. That is materially built. We're just waiting on final deliveries of transformer switch gears, which are showing up in the next month or two.
Yeah, again, I'm not disagreeing about the benefit alternative energy. I just want to make sure that when we sign on the dotted line that everything looks good. Mr. Mull, I'm finished with my questions. Dr. Herring, my recommendation would be that we do not move this to the voting meeting, that we wait until we see the contract and discuss it again at the October count. Thank you.
Can I continue to ask some questions here, Dr. Herring? We talk a little bit about delays in the process, and I wonder, as I think Mr. Morgan pointed out, we waited a little bit too long with the construction of the transportation center and had some pretty significant increases in terms of overall costs. Are there any, the longer we delay, and I know our board is very thoughtful and very thorough and wants to make sure everything is absolutely tight and clean. Is there any potential for us to incur additional costs that might make this a much less financially attractive opportunity for the school district? And I think, Ron, when you and I spoke, you talked about the Inflation Reduction Act and how there were certain provisions in that might impact upon things like, let's say, labor costs or something like that. Are there things that might, with time, with delay, would increase our overall costs and make it less profitable to the district to do? Because keep in mind, this is primarily a financial opportunity for the school district to make a significant dent in our annual costs and long-term costs.
Yeah, I can think of two things. One is obviously electric bills. Those are continuing to hike. We can revisit when those contracts, the supply contracts that the district has currently. Obviously, if you go out and negotiate a contract today, it's going to be a much higher rate. It's all based on when is that expiration date. I have to go back and revisit what that expiration date is.
It's May of 2023, I believe, is the latest date. So we're just to segue into that real quick, we're currently locked in at 3.265 cents per kilowatt hour. The last quote that we had to continue after May 2023 was 10.1 cents. That's a significant jump.
We actually locked in a really good deal in 2018.
Yeah, so obviously as you continue to, whether solar goes forward or not, you're going to jump into a much higher electric cost starting in June of 2023. That's one thing that's pretty significant when you talk about, you mentioned $600,000 of district cost electricity per year. Just picture that doubling or tripling. That's an extra cost to the district. You know, do that on a per month basis, that's like 50 plus grand a year, or per month if that number doubles in additional cost. The other part, so electric bill is one thing that and every inflation is kind of impacting the electric market. Number two is, as part of the IRA bill, there is a provision in there for systems of this size that they would need to comply with prevailing wage, even if we own the system. As part of that, we do not have prevailing wage in our cash flow there from our ownership side. So that would inherently increase the cost of the system that we'd be offering to the district. That would probably increase the cost, just spitballing, probably 10% roughly, what the impact of that would be. The IRA bill, essentially, there's an undefined date that's coming out there that they're saying it's the guidance date, basically. That could be any time in the next 3 months, 4 months. Basically, if the project doesn't start before then, it's required to be prevailing wage, regardless of if the district owns it or if we own it. So right now, under this presentation, it is a non-prevailing wage job.
So how would that impact on the overall cost of the project if we would have to go with prevailing wage?
It would increase, let's just say hypothetically, this 10% increase, it would increase all of those, contract service payments, the buyouts, all that, basically go by 10% roughly.
So in some respects, there is a bit of a clock that's going on here. Yeah.
Those are the two things I can think of: is the electric bill, and then there's this unknown date. And again, the market isn't entirely sure what's the criteria. I mean, we've seen this before in different avenues, but it's just a recommending starting sooner than later would be the recommendation. But as far as what's the drop dead date, we don't know what that is. All we've been told by the IRS is whatever that determined date is, there's a 60-day guidance. Basically, they say, okay, it's now. You get 60 days basically from that point to kind of pull the trigger, or to basically make sure you're satisfying that criteria.
Thank you. So, from my perspective, as a member of the committee, the Finance and Facilities Committee, I'd like to counter Mr. Morgan's, recommendation and basically say I think we should move it for a board vote at the next meeting, and at least get some clarity in terms of whether the board is going to support this project or not. Whether we agree entirely on the scheme that we're looking at, I think that's the other half of this issue, is not only the contract, which I think we should try to clean that up as much as we can and answer as many questions as we can prior to the next board meeting, but also, the question about, the set out, the layout of this, some of the points that Mr. Quinter made and other board members have made in terms of, what's the proper and appropriate schematic for us to kind of follow, and what are we willing to settle for? Are we willing to settle for 100% versus 110%? And I think that's a decision. That's a second level of decision I think that the board really needs to make. So I see it somewhat as a twofold decision-making process for the board coming up. One is the contract, and number two is the layout. And we do have layout options. And so I see a vote opportunity for us to kind of, settle in on a contract, really be able to get the project moving forward, and then number two, working out and negotiating the actual layout of the system.
I'd like to try again with some questions. I'm looking at page 9 of Mr. Brubaker's report. He has his laid out, I guess, by section from the contract, and that's why I'm having trouble locating the answers in the two handouts from Wandell. So I'll read the question, and then perhaps the representative from Wandell can tell me where in the handouts this question is answered. Have any studies been performed to determine if any upgrades are necessary to the electrical system in order to accommodate interconnection of the system? Where is that question answered? What should have been done is taking the reference to Mr. Brubaker's the page number and the paragraph number so that we could kind of go back and forth. Instead, that's why I can't find it.
They got the summary question, so they weren't given the actual report that he gave. They got the summary questions.
That's what I'd like to have answers. For example, here's some more, also on page 9. What type of racking system is contemplated? Fixed tilt, single axis rotating? What type of modules are contemplated? Monofacial, bifacial? What is the duration of the warranty period for the solar modules? I would like
some of these questions we've answered in past meetings, John. That's why they weren't passed over there. It's a 30-year warranty on the solar panels. It was fixed axis, I believe, was what we were told.
Correct.
And the conversation about the additional costs for the interconnection, I believe, is what we were discussing earlier.
And that's answered on one of the questions, the 200,000.
But it's not a cost question. It's have any studies been performed to determine if any upgrades are necessary to the electrical system in order to accommodate. It's different from a cost question.
No, because a study would cost me money, and I'm trying to do it on someone else's nickel, which is Greenworks nickel. But they can't go to Med Ed to find out exactly what the interconnection would be unless they have a contract with us.
But it would just be easier for me and better for me. I could make a more informed decision if I had answers to these questions. I don't think I can do that.
Mr. Fiddler, I agree. That's why I asked about having a secondary point in which we vote to move forward, because it seems like a lot of the holes and the questions we have can't happen until step 1 happens, but I don't want to get to step 2 without us saying yes or no in a second time.
And there are a lot of very good questions and suggestions here made by someone with 30-some years of experience in this industry, which I don't have. I don't think anyone on this board has. So I would like to see point-by-point answers to these questions. If they've already been answered, then put a reference. This has been answered in email number 32, dated such and such. I don't see why that's so difficult. I'm used to doing that. I did it most of my career.
Sorry, I have a quick question. I have a couple of quick questions. Okay, I apologize. So if I'm looking at this correctly, I see that there's, part A, how much solar electricity is generated, and is that based on, what exactly is that based on?
Yeah, so we use a simulation software called Helioscope. So that's a computer-based software subscription service that we provide that uses location, uses the tilt of the panels, uses, is there trees in front of it, stuff like that, to basically yield historical projections based on.
And how accurate is that?
It's the industry leader. It's percentage accuracy. I mean, I would say we're within a couple of percent of that number.
So like 95%, we say, or something like that.
Yeah, I'd say it's fair.
Okay, thanks. The renewable energy credits, I see that the 40 goes up to, let me see, year 15. Is that based on current, the current PA system, like the current law in Pennsylvania right now? It says it's going to go to year 15.
So SRECs, or solar renewable energy credits, that's where the state comes in and helps, promote solar. Pennsylvania operates on like a supply and demand driven curve. So right now the SREC price in PA is roughly about $40 to $45.
Okay.
So there's no, as Sherry mentioned, that there is upside potential that those SRECs could go higher. They also could go lower.
Right.
So what we've projected in that curve is that they would decline to help de-risk the value of those SRECs. So in year 17, is the SREC going to be X dollars? There's no guarantee on that, but
So that was just kind of a arbitrary kind of year that you chose, or was there a specific reason you chose?
Yeah, just having to step down. No specific reason to it.
Okay.
One thing I would share is, that Pennsylvania has significantly less solar than some of our neighboring states.
Sure.
Like
It's because we have more fracking and all of that in general, correct?
Sure.
Okay. The other question I had, according to this cash flow, so you have the cash flow analysis for 40 years, correct? However, the production warranty on the solar panels are only 30 years. And you've never seen solar panels that actually have gone beyond 30 years yet, correct?
I would say most commercial solar projects are probably more in the 15 to 20 year range at this point, but there's been panels around for quite a long time.
So the 20 to 30 range, you would say, you've seen?
Very commercialized, yes, like a much bigger scale.
Of course, understood. And I realize we're going smaller, obviously, and
Sure.
things like that. So we're basing this on a 40-year average, but these are only warranted for 30 years. And if I'm doing my calculations correctly, I'm seeing that over the kilowatt hours, how much solar is actually generated between year 1 and year 40, there's going to be almost a 20% decrease in the amount of solar that these panels can actually generate, because I do understand that they deteriorate over time, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and so do we know how much the balance is going to be at year 30 when we have to replace those all ourselves?
Yeah, so the reason it's a 40-year cash flow, good question, that's the estimated useful life based on the solar industry. So there's lots of studies out there that 40 is what they're quoting.
Why is it 40 if you've only seen 30?
But it's warranted for 30. So at the end of year
Right.
30, they're still projected to produce about 82% of year 1. That's at the end of the warranty period.
Well, that's why I'd asked how many you'd seen, like on a much more industrial level. I haven't seen any over 30. You've seen more that last 40 years?
That's what the industry is telling you right now. That's based on lab studies and manufacturing reports from the manufacturers.
But we have no idea after year 30 what it's going to decrease. It's just kind of projected, correct?
Yeah, we're declining at the 0.5%.
Projected at
Okay,
0.5%
understood.
every year.
Okay, so at 30 years, when we have to replace these ourselves or if something happens, does anybody know where we break at that point? I understand the $30 million, net savings, but where the 30-year point, where these things we have to replace them fully, if we need to replace them, you know what I mean? I just want to hedge my bets here. If we have to replace them and they're starting to fail, how much have we saved at that point? Does anybody know? Because I couldn't figure it out. I apologize. I don't have my calculator with me.
We can certainly show the cash flow on just 30 years if you'd like to see what that looks like. Essentially, there'd be no value after year 30.
I think it's 20 million, right? Is it, or is it?
Yeah,
Is it clear to the flow?
you're summing up your net cash flows
Okay,
from
so
year
it's-
1 to year 30 to get your total.
So is it 18 or 19 somewhere there?
18 or 19 million.
Okay, so
If they're really small, like not.
yeah, that's where I had the problem. I apologize. Okay, so there's a $19 million cash flow instead of the, say 29 plus the 10% reduction. Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I had my head wrapped around this. And have you ever found, the other question I had, which might seem very ignorant because I'm not, not really up on this. Well, I shouldn't say that. I've read a lot about it. But if we went totally solar and, we have a power outage and it's a storm, how long does it take the backup to, jump in? Like, are our kids going to be out of, is it like a second? Is it 5 minutes? Is it an hour? What's the changeover? Like, how fast is that?
Like right now, even with solar, we're going to have to keep our generators here. So we have backup generators that kick off, and actually kick on instantaneously.
Okay, so the solar
But it depends on, like, the kitchens, they'll only take care of the freezers, the
Right.
coolers, the lights, the heat, but they're not going to take care of 100% of all our generators. But we have, I think they're all propane or natural gas generators.
Okay.
So they do kick in.
So if we're part of the solar grid, and I'm not saying this would ever happen, but if they did have some kind of like
We'd have
No.
our backup generators.
No, I meant if we had like rolling brownouts or blackouts like they have in California, we're part of that, correct? Or would we be able to then buy?
We'd be still, if it was during the day,
Right.
we'd be giving money for giving power
Energy
back
to
to the
them.
grid
Okay.
and still covering our own billings. If it was at night and it was a brownout, then we'd be on our generators.
Okay. Just wanted to make that clear. Thanks.
Andrea, it's 19,046,170 at year 30.
Seth, have you ever seen a reinstall?
A reinstall? There a couple smaller ones that basically you're going to take down. Maybe the racking is still usable, but the panels weren't. The system was 15 years ago or 20 years ago. What you would see was potentially that the wattage was improved or something like that. So it's called re-energization. That's something that has happened. I would say that's pretty minimal though, just because again you're using a 30 or 40 year useful life. It doesn't really make much sense to take it down and put a new one on.
Do you think a solar panel is going to be the size of a cell phone in 40 years?
Good question. I'm not sure.
Still don't have flying cars, so.
How much has the size of a solar panel changed since they've started being made?
Yeah, if anything, if you compare it from even 5 years ago, it's actually gotten bigger. So the reason for that is they've increased the amount of wattage or the ability to produce power per panel. Basically, with the logic of it, if we can set, instead of doing 10,000 solar panels, maybe we can get away with doing only 8,000 and get the same number. That helps drive down that labor cost and makes it more cost effective. But as far as, I would say historically, you're seeing the panels actually just get bigger over the last 10, 15 years, again, with that same concept.
In regards to the Lausch site, have we had anybody contact us regarding that? Anyone in the community, any neighbors? Because I know I haven't received any emails about that.
Nothing directly.
Nothing. I just want to say it's really important that we hear from the community, especially in that area. For us to make that decision, we need to know if that's something that neighbors are going to have an issue with. Also, that takes away a sports field. Is that a soccer?
Soccer and lacrosse, both youth organizations.
Okay. And how many soccer fields do we have that we utilize?
Well, actually, I talked to Tom, and he would do. We have a softball field down below here with 2 out, a left and a right outfield that no one uses all season. So, and that's actually a flatter field. That's where he moved down to. Where the field up here is a slight slope, and he would even be willing to line that washes away. So they'd still be able to be on this side. Just have to be moved down.
Okay, so the issue at Lausch solely would be aesthetics for the community then? But we haven't heard anything from anyone yet. Okay.
I do think that question was answered well. That they would put up whatever landscaping we felt was necessary to create a barrier where it was not aesthetically displeasing.
Would be nice.
What, along those lines, what kind of fencing do you typically install for beautification? Is there shrubs that go along with the fencing? Or?
Yeah, I would say your standard typically is like a 6-foot chain link fence. We've done chain link, we've done black chain link. I mean, if you would like, obviously schools. I mean, other options. There's been split rail fence, but with just having kids around, I mean, typically the 6-foot chain link seems to be the top choice for school districts.
Both fencing and landscaping. You did answer the
Yeah, so I mean shrubbery. Typically, I would say we don't usually include, but if there's a couple of trees, that's a pretty minimal cost. If you want a line of buffer, if you want cyclone fencing, basically, so you can't see inside of the fence, that's another option. We can look at a couple different explorations there.
And remind me, is security included in that with the fencing? Because I know fencing is not extra cost.
Security being camera, or yeah, we typically don't do cameras on it's just the fence. I mean, other options if 6-foot chain link isn't desirable, you can make those taller if you're concerned about vandalism. But we've had very minimal vandalisms. especially with I think the locations here, they're going to be pretty visible. So I don't think you're going to have a whole lot of issues with adolescents.
A couple things I did still have on my end. I wanted to cover I don't recall if we mentioned the insurance premium increase or the amount, but it was to cover this for $7 million in coverage. It was $2,489 annual increase in insurance coverage.
Correct.
One thing I wanted to clarify, lawn maintenance. I think at one point we thought we didn't have to take care of the lawn maintenance through years 1 through 5. I believe the answer, based on the contract, is we do have to take care of the lawn maintenance.
And typically, what we would refer to the school district as a host. Typically, what we have the hosts do is essentially just make sure that the grass doesn't get to 3 foot tall. That's the minimum height of the panel. Okay. So usually that kind of yields cutting it once, maybe twice a year. Some of that, obviously, aesthetics might come into play, but that we can talk through that. But we typically would low no grass to reduce the amount of time it's landscaped.
And all these properties, except behind a lot, we cut weekly, so we probably cut once a month because you don't want to get a foot. We're residential. I think that probably Exeter and St. Lawrence probably has a foot roll for weeds, right? So we'd be doing once a month instead of once a week. And up on the hill would be behind a lot. Probably do that once a year.
If that part is a concern to the district, there are professional landscapers that just do solar arrays. That's something we can certainly change if there's heartburn practice.
The construction, there wasn't really any construction milestones listed in the contract. When would you have to start on the project in order to have everything up and running and completed by the time that our energy contract is done in May 2023? Is that out of scope even at this point?
Yeah. I would probably tell you 6 months ago. That's probably what you're looking at.
Okay.
I would say 12 to 15 months is roughly what you're looking at from contract to complete.
So there, even if we move forward with this initiative, we would still end up having to pay a higher electric cost for at least a short period of time.
Yeah, probably either a 6 or a 12-month period would probably be what you'd recommend. Definitely wouldn't want to enter into like a 3 or 5 year contract. You want to keep that shorter.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of the like just as Central Columbia as an example, again, just a similar size project to what we're talking about here. Contract was signed in December of last year. We were going through the utility. That one was PPL in the township. We broke ground on site in June, and basically it was a June, July, August build. So essentially all the construction was built around the school year, so that way it was not impeding on the kid learning experience.
I do have one question. This is probably more directed towards Mr. Fike. From my understanding, that we do have an existing solar panel configuration on one of the roofs at Owatin that only powers the library, and I believe it's only 150 milliwatts.
The panels are only 150 kilowatts each, where the new panels now are 525 or 550. 550. And that only powers the library from the sun. It's also on the southwest side. It's not the perfect
So it's not getting
lay
its
to
full
get
potential.
a lot of solar. But this is a green building. I don't think they got an extra 10% of reimbursement from the state by meeting the goals, so they put that on there to make it a green building.
Yeah, there was some discussion that was broken or not working. Has that been fixed?
The inverters once lasted that long.
Okay.
Like I said, I think it was a last minute thing to get the extra 10% from the state. I don't think they put the best equipment there.
Okay.
Inverters should last 20 years. This is going on and on and down. If you notice in the cash flow projection, there's a large increase for year 20 because that's the year that warranty expires, even though it probably won't go that year.
Just to replace it out to get a new inverter.
Well, but they put in the cash flow in case you have to
Right,
replace
they
it at
they
that
put it
time.
in there, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like a car warranty. You give you 3 years or 100,000 miles, and then you would buy an extra warranty. Probably be those things that be applied down the road.
So if a similar maintenance situation happened with these solar panels, we would be covered because
Right.
it's.
And I did ask, you know, what if we replaced or tied that in, roof cost, very expensive to change out the panels, and what be worth it, 'cause it's not on the rectangles and stuff. That roof.
Okay. And kind of segueing into that conversation, I know there's definitely been some conversations in the community about why are we taking up, or why would we potentially take up green space for this project, and there's definitely been suggestions from others of why can't it be put on the roof, why can't, I believe even a carport was a suggestion there. Obviously, I believe a carport would be, I don't want to speak for it, but I'm assuming it would be probably cost prohibitive to try to build that. I'm wondering if somebody could address those alternate locations.
Before they address that, I will address that. I look at this as an expense reduction project, not as a green works project.
Right.
Or and those costs are double.
Yeah.
But I'll let them address that. So I was looking at the best bang for our buck. I'm trying to decrease expenses.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd say the carport, that's a pretty common idea. Obviously, there's a lot of parking lot spaces. Again, it's probably about double the cost to do the exact same. If you put it on a per panel basis, it's about double. The roofs, that's another good option. We did look at doing potentially low-range rooftop. I would say historically, as we're trying to get to like 100, 110% offset, typically if you just do it on the roofs, you're probably closer in like the 30 to 50%. That really depends on available space for roofs. I mean, HVACs are up there. There's elevation changes in the roof. There's trees. That all kind of goes into play. But typically, when you do a roof mount, you're more like 30 to 50% offset target.
And let me add to that. Mr. Quinter says we need room for another building, but from past experience, if you increase in size, you're basically adding on to every building, unless you're going to build a whole elementary school. But usually, if you increase in size of students, it's throughout the district. So you have more in the high school, more in the junior high, more in the middle school, or you build a kindergarten, K1 center. So if you're going to add on to the buildings, you don't want to have to take down the rooftop array to add on or do renovations. That's another reason I didn't look at rooftops. Because like Lorraine, it has 28 years left of roof. You just did that, but I don't think the building's going to last 28 years. It's probably going to be major renovations. So I would suggest that.
Mr. Quinter, did you have something you were going to say?
I decided to not mention the junior high school is not expandable. Senior high school is coming up on it unless you're willing to give up other things being expandable. Lorraine probably should be torn down, another building built. But that's, we looked all at this crap. And you don't have the ability to expand a lot of places.
So the other question I was going to dive into too is just with advances in solar energy. I know it's been also mentioned that there's some new technologies with one recently I think has fairly come out in news articles with researchers or scientists have come up with a way to conduct electricity with transparent glass. Have you heard anything about within the next 10, 20 years of where that's going to go or how that could be applied? Based on the things I've read, it sounds like it's not going to be applicable at any time in the near future.
Yeah, I would say we share the same sort of experiences. I think the biggest change in the solar panel industry in the last couple of years is rather than them being what's called monofacial, just meant it was producing on the front side, and he had a white sheet on the back. They're actually called bifacial now. So the back side is actually able to pick up additional reflection from the snow, from the grass. Typically what we're seeing on our systems we've installed over the last couple of years, it's about a 5 to 7% performance boost by having bifacial. At least it's the backside production. That's probably the biggest technology. Again, it's all trying to pound in more production in the same square foot. So that's kind of what it's all trying to get to.
Yeah, just for my personal comments, I do have to say that there are obviously assumptions being made when we look at that savings up there for 40-year savings, 29.2 million, 26 million. There's three main assumptions. One is the solar output is at 100%. I believe based on our contract, in the minimum biennial output, you're covering 85% of the output, if I understand that correctly.
Correct. That's just an additional developer warranty on the system.
Correct. So we could dip down to 86%, still be under our electric generation, but once we go below 85%,
we would have to make you whole. Correct.
Yeah. Okay. But those projections are based on getting 100%, and obviously the degradation is already included in there of 0.5% a year. The other assumption is if we're financing this and trying to free up our cash flow for the number of years we finance, the finance rate is assumed to be 3% in year 6, and we can't lock that in year 6. Or we can't lock it in now, we'd have to wait until year 6 to lock that in. We could buy it outright, but we obviously would have larger upfront costs at that time as well. And the other assumption being made is that the electric prices are going to climb 2% year over year over the next 40 years. I don't know if I think that's going to happen. I don't think any of us can predict that, but I do think that's very optimistic to say that it's going to continue to increase, and we're not going to see any swing to that. Obviously, right now, geopolitically, with everything going on in Russia and Europe, I imagine energy costs are going to remain pretty high for a few years, but we don't know. So I just want to reiterate from myself, when we look at those numbers, 29.2, 26 million, I think those are very optimistic. Thank you.
Can I just ask a question about what happens at the end of 40 years when we have all of those solar panels? What do we do with them?
Yeah, so the intent would be obviously that you go out and put another solar project up after its useful life is terminated, but the actual panels that are there, the original phase 1 panels, you would essentially remove them, and then there's going to be recycling processes for that. Depends on if you're just removing the panels or if you're trying to remove all the racking. Basically, that's just the steel I-beams. All of that can be recycled, and it has salvage value to it. But there's recycling processes that are in place to adequately recycle.
And is there then a cost to all that removal?
What we've found is essentially the salvage value actually covers the cost to remove all of that equipment, because a lot of it is raw materials. As far as again, we don't see that as a net cost. It's a salvage value covering the cost.
I have a few questions. Where do you source your materials from?
So the solar panels, as part of the IRA bill, again that was the federal bill. There are going to be a lot more solar panels made in the United States. That's probably still a couple of years from now. About 80% of all the solar panels in the world are actually from Southeast Asia. So you're getting a lot of them. We personally do a lot from Vietnam. So that's where we typically source the solar panels today. Again, in a couple of years, they might all, a larger percent might be coming from the United States. The racking is U.S. made. The labor is all coming from Pennsylvania labor. But it's an assortment. But right now, the solar panels are full.
And typically during your, like the 5-year, we're paying, the contract service amounts. With the current customers that you do have in that 5-year period, do you have any reported issues? Have you had to replace anything? Go out and maintain anything? repair anything that is, out of the ordinary?
Yeah, as part of all of our systems, we would do annual maintenance on them, basically similar to changing the oil in the car that you have preventative maintenance. As part of this also, we have a remote monitoring system, so you can actually see how the system's producing on a website. So that's also how we would do a lot of our monitoring on a daily basis. So you can actually see how every single inverter is actually performing. So if you see an inverter is down, we actually know to go out there and look at it. So it's a little bit of both, seeing it remotely and on site.
So if you do see that there's a problem or something does happen, like vandalism or, hailstorm or something falls out of the sky and you need to replace it, like what is the turnaround time for that? Like is the whole system shut down or do you just work specific to that panel that needs repair?
Usually what the issue is maybe a string on an inverter, so maybe a couple percentage of one inverter is down. For what we're talking about here, you probably have 40 inverters across all of the sites. So you're talking percentages of the entire system for a specific time. SRE, the company I work for, we're out of Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania. We do have an in-house technician, so that he would be the actual one that would be going out to maintenance the system. So we'd have a pretty quick turnaround to address those.
And is that an additional cost? What we're spending in the contract service agreement for the first time?
Under the power service agreement and the original structure, as we own the system, that's all included in our responsibilities. If the school does elect to purchase this in year 6, again, it's your option. You don't have to purchase it. If you do purchase it, the service is now on you as the owner, so that's been included as part of the operations and maintenance column of the contract for the cash flow.
Okay, so that starts at $40,000 the first year and then increases up through year 40.
Yeah, that would be covering maintenance on it, the scheduled maintenance, maybe a little bit of breakage. It's just an allocated expense budget.
And are we at risk then to finding a service provider to service the panels and stuff?
We would provide that to you if you choose.
Okay, so we could provide that.
Yeah,
You would provide that if we contracted with you.
Correct.
So these are estimations based upon your current agreements you have in place with existing customers, or is this just a projection of the maintenance costs and fees?
I would say that's a projection of
Six.
what the expense would be. If you'd like some sort of document saying we would service the contract, we could certainly do that.
Now, do you have any current customers who have not purchased after the 5-year period?
I would say a lot of our customers do not purchase after year 5. It could be financing constraints that they don't want to purchase it, or they're just fine continuing under the lease structure that's set up as is. Very few of the customers have actually purchased the system, I would say.
Okay, so then at year 6, then what happens? Do the service contract fees just continue?
Yeah, there's an escalation rate on that from year 1 through 5 that would continue through the end of year 28, or a buyout, whichever happens sooner.
Okay, so up to year 28.
Correct. After 28, if you never purchase it, we would be responsible to remove the system or turn it over to you at pretty much no value.
Do we have projections for the costs for year 6 through 28, Brian? If we don't purchase at year 6?
No, because I was actually looking that in year 6, our debt service drops from $8 million down to 0, decline right out that year and take the full savings ourselves.
Okay. I think we should get that.
That's why I structured it this way. Like I said, I was looking at the most inexpensive way to save money.
But you're saying most of your customers don't purchase, correct? For finance.
Correct.
So then you hold this system for 28 years.
Typically, I would say that's what the norm has been.
Okay.
All the customers have the same option that you do.
Okay.
Again, what I would point you to is we want what's best for you as our customer. If you look at the net cash flow, I don't have the cash flow in front of me, but if you look at year 5 and 6 on the right hand side, you'll notice that cash flow jumps pretty considerably from year 5 to 6. That's basically you purchasing the system and financing it at a cheaper rate. But we can certainly show you the cash flow if you never purchase it.
I'd like to see that just so we know what the options are.
Sure.
And as far as your customers are concerned, what is the greatest year you're at with them? Is it 5, 6, 7? Do you have any in the 20th year?
So we've been around since 2010, so we have systems that have been around since 2010, 2011.
And do you maintain data on the cost effectiveness of the panels as to how much those districts are saving or your customers are saving?
Yes.
Do we have copies of any of that to compare?
We can share data if you'd like to see it.
I think that's all I have. But thank you.
Sure.
So if there's no other questions or discussion, or at least any other questions or discussion with Quandel or Greenworks here, I guess, yeah, I heard some things out there in terms of waiting to see a contract get modified, some additional questions get answered. In terms of the location or the layout, has anyone given any thought to, if this were to move forward, what configuration would be more desirable?
I personally am comfortable with the Lausch location, unless we hear something more. I mean, I agree. I think we move it forward with all three locations. I was really hoping the community would step up and come out and talk about this, but we haven't really heard from anybody, so I guess the aesthetic was only my issue and losing that field for sports. So.
I'll say that the reason I like the Lausch option is that that particular field that we're talking about is replicated 2 times already at Lausch. We've got 3 fields that are pretty much identical there. And the other thing is, I think we can, as Brian pointed out, and as Tom McGath has said, you know, we would be able to kind of add additional field capacity adjacent to or part of the baseball diamond. You know, it's already located there. So, and I look at the fact that the utilization of that field is probably, I would say, less than 5% of time in the course of a year, while the utilization of that field with a solar array would be essentially every day, 365 days. So it's got full use, and I think we're making the best use of the land and maximizing our financial benefit to that. So I'm favorable about it. I'm particularly, you know, I mean, I think sometimes it's, if you want to get something of value, you have to you know, look at what all your options are. I think we've done that, and I think to me this, you know, that is one of the things. If we want to get 150 or 110%, that's just as you know, where we have to, I think, draw a particular line. And I don't know whether it's really, as long as we offer, you know, continued options and opportunities for our community teams and the members of the community, I think it's a good plan.
And can I just add to that and confirm that that would not affect the playground at Lausch at all? The playground will stay there. Okay, thank you.
This is just the field between the 2 goalposts that are in the back there.
I would be in favor if we were going to move forward to using the Lausch location. I guess my biggest question would be, in the next 30 to 40 years, this property could be a location where we might consider building a new building, and we need to do that. And if we did that, would we have to take that right out? So if at some point we needed another school, would this be a site where we look at putting another school in? By doing so, we have to remove that array. And I guess the question for Seth would be, if we did choose to do that in the next 30 years, can those arrays be moved to another field location where we can still get the rest of their life out of it?
Yeah, I think you can certainly relocate. What I would say is it depends on, are we talking 28 years from now or 7 years from now? I think would be part of the decision there.
That's the same crystal ball you have.
Right.
Seth, correct me if I'm wrong, those arrays, the poles, they're basically driven down to the ground on 7 feet. They're not cemented in, so they can just be, I say lifted out, but they're not easy to lift out. But yeah, am I correct?
Correct. There'd be a post pounder that comes in and hits it, embeds the depth at somewhere between like 4 to 7 feet.
Okay, but they're not cemented, so they are removable.
Correct.
Can we get an idea of how people feel about whether we should move it to the voting meeting or the next count?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's the next question. So if, I know I've had a conversation with Mrs. Montaigne about this before, with contract concerns. Even with a vote, we can say, we can approve or reject a vote, but if we approve the vote, we can actually make it contingent on the solicitor's review, which means if there was any modifications that we need to make to it, it could be included in with that. So yeah, I would be curious to see if we have enough consensus to move it forward to a vote. I know I'm in favor of moving it. I just feel like we're beating a dead horse at this point. We just need to make a decision.
And I'm in agreement with you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree. I would move forward.
I'd like to say too, I mean, I like the idea of moving forward because, as always, I mean, if we go to a point where we're not comfortable, we can always table at a voting meeting like we've done before. So it's not like we're locked into it, but it gives us the option, I think, to move forward if we feel satisfied by it, that we've got the information that we need on it.
That's 4 of us. Anybody else want to give an opinion on that?
Oh, I said earlier that I was okay with moving forward with all 3 things. So
To the voting meeting.
to the voting meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Hearing no other discussion, I'm going to move on to item B.
Mr. Mel?
Yes.
Dr. Herring, could I request a 5-minute recess? Is that right? Thank you.
Sure, we'll be taking a 5-minute recess then.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you
Appreciate
for
the time.
coming out again tonight. I appreciate the information. right, back to you, Mr. Mel.
Yes, items B, sorry, I jumped ahead here. Item B, it is recommended that the Board of School Directors approve the Cottage 7 transportation employee as a driver for the 2022-2023 school year pending any necessary paperwork.
This is, all right, I just want to add, you actually have the contract with Cottage 7 to provide transportation, but as a school board, any driver that transports a student has to be approved by the school board, either our own or someone else's driver. So that's what this is.
Thank you. All right. No other discussion on item B? All right. Item C, we are revisiting the bus bids. This was tabled from the prior voting meeting. They are good through October 10th. And the propane bidder stipulates that they are not responsible for meeting the delivery date due to supply chain issues. So I believe at the last voting meeting we were going to potentially vote on 2 diesel buses until we decided to table for have more discussion on the propane.
Yes, and there's 2 issues here. I'd like us to have a discussion of propane. But talking to Sharon Montaigne, with the stipulation that the one propane bidder, we only have one person bid on the propane bus, said they could not guarantee they could meet delivery by 20 September or June 30th, 2023. They also stipulated it be a 2024 bus, which means they're probably not going to deliver it until sometime the following year. Our bid spec said 22 or 23 buses and delivery by June 30th, 2023. I contacted the other 2 bidders that only bid propane buses. The one, their manufacturer represent stopped making propane buses. They're going directly to electric, and the other did not bid because they would not be able to get the propane engine to next summer, so they wouldn't be able to meet the deadline. So after talking to Sharon, she said you should not go with the bid on the propane because they didn't meet the stipulations or requirements, and the second bidder that didn't bid that does have propane could contest it, so that'd be thrown out. The diesel buses were all bid properly, and that's one of the reasons we recommended that. Plus Ben had, he wanted to get diesel now. One of the things that I do want to say, we are going to need 2 more buses than we have next year. ECTC, which is a county VOTEC, is no longer going to transport students. Every school district has to transport the students to and from ECTC next year. They tried to do it this year. The superintendent's business managers got upset and they pushed it off 1 year. But there's actually an agreement coming out that they agreed to hold off to the following year. They have a problem trying to find drivers. They also have 4 different companies, and none of the companies will give them a year contract. So they're actually pushing it back. Now, supposedly we'll get a decrease in tuition because they're not going to get more transportation, but we will need an additional 2 buses next year. I am still recommending, just to make sure we have buses, to buy the 2 diesel, but I'm also going to suggest if you want to go with propane, we start the bidding process over again for propane for 2024 buses, which will be fall 2023 through spring, so we can get on that delivery schedule. But that's up to you. But Dave had a bunch of questions, so I'll let you go from here.
Can I just have you clarify? I'm sorry, because we're saying so many numbers. So the 2 that we're asking for, these are not the 2 that you're also saying we're going to need.
That's so we have them for next year.
Oh, so these are for us to have them for the BCTC route that we're picking up.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And I would, at this time, I think they were only offering 500, or it was very little for trade-in. We can probably keep those for parts, or or actually sell them ourselves for scrap for a lot more money than we have right now. It's ridiculous what broken buses are going for. People just can't get the parts for the buses. But that's my 2 cents. I'll let Dave go here.
Yeah, I mean, I've said this at the last meeting that one of my concerns was that as a board we had sort of, I think, come to the conclusion that there were some real benefits of moving toward propane and so when we had new purchases, the thinking was that we would continue to kind of replenish the fleet with more cleaner options than diesel. And there are some reasons for that are not just environmental or health related, which there are both certainly benefits there, but also financially. I mean, I think we all know that the cost of propane is less than half the cost of diesel right now. And even though diesel gets better gas mileage, more miles per gallon, it's not significant, maybe 10% more than propane per gallon. So there's some real benefits there. And a lot of districts that I'm seeing several now that have really starting to scale up the propane, including Wilson School District at Berks County, which is the other school district that actually owns and operates their own fleets and systems. One thing I've kind of learned from Ben and I think is important is that if we are going to continue on this trajectory of moving toward propane, it makes a lot of sense for us to kind of also build out some of the infrastructure, which means that we need to kind of, rather than the kind of fueling system that we have right now, which is done, I forget the actual term it's called. Is it wet fueling or something like that, Brian, where the tanker comes in
and fills directly to the bus.
Fills to the bus, as opposed to having a stationary tank that's in place and secure, and that the buses are fueled directly from that. That's one of the things that we, if we're going to continue to move in this direction, and I think Ben would agree, this is something we would probably need to invest in, recognizing that the long-term benefits of propane do have some financial opportunities, and that there are some grants and benefits through the Department of, I think it's DPE, that would be able to kind of provide districts with the cash that's necessary to kind of purchase some of that infrastructure. So, I mean, I think it's a good way for us to continue to move in, but I can understand some of the limitations we have right now. We have this very kind of unexpected increase in service requirements, for BCTC, which kind of came at a bad time. And so I understand the argument. I do appreciate, that explanation. I'm less concerned about the purchase for the diesels this time because of the bid process we had to go through. I guess I'm a little more satisfied if we continue as a board to recognize the value of propane as in the future. I don't know how anybody else feels about we're done any reading on propane, but I think I do plan to send the board an interesting article that I picked up recently, and I think it profiles some of the districts: Council Rock, North Penn, Upper Moreland, and these are some districts that are really kind of moved aggressively into it and are showing some real benefits from lower maintenance costs, better satisfaction from the drivers and the riders of the bus, and certainly the monetary savings with the fuel being far less costly than diesel currently is.
So, Brian, did you get to find the difference between diesel and propane and support maintenance of buses?
No, I'm working on that. I know you're going to ask the question. I got to get more data from other school districts. I can just give you, or Ben can give you the data for our district, which is very limited because we only had 2 buses up to this year. We just took 2 new buses in June, so they're on the road less than 3 months. But we did have one of the I do know from the radio we had one break down today. Our mechanics are not trained yet on diesel, but everything's still on the warrant, or propane, but everything's still on the warrant. So, I mean, I can get that. If, you know,
If
what I'm going
everyone-
to ask for is the board, if I can start the bidding process for the following year, so we can, you know, then I'll go for propane. I'm still asking to approve the 2 diesel right now because we cannot award the propane bid we have because the other person would say I could have stipulated the same thing and given it a bid.
With everybody skipping the propane and going to,
Well, that's one bus
electric,
Now,
why bother?
No, we are, the one thing with the new bus garage, we did pay the extra $30,000 to put the conduit in the ground, so if we ever do go for charging stations, we can run wires to that. Ben has already put in for grants. We were told we don't qualify because of our economic situation, but I also found out that a lot of the disadvantaged school districts cannot get the grant because they don't have their own buses. So we put it in anyway because maybe they get lucky that they still have money and then or the non-disadvantaged districts. Because like Reading doesn't have their own buses, Philadelphia doesn't have their own buses, Chester, you know, a lot of these contracted out so they aren't available for the grant. So hopefully, because right now an electric bus is $370,000, or 116 for propane, 110 for diesel. You know, last year I also recommended we get the diesel, but the board overrode me and went for propane. It was 8,000 more, but we went and applied for a grant and got 30,000 for each one of those buses, so it was actually cheaper. If we do get propane next year, I'll plan for a grant. There's no guarantee, but you know, hopefully there'll be grant money to offset the costs. But like I said, right now the electric 370,000, which is way out of our league.
In the voting meeting content, Ben had mentioned that the longevity of the propane engines were in question. Do you have any context behind that in terms of what he was saying there? Because I think it was questioning, will they actually last 15 years and log over 200,000 miles? Assuming that's what we're seeing with diesel.
But you'll see, I think the problem, and Ben can jump in on this, the propane engines for buses are basically Ford large pickup trucks. They do not make them for over-the-road tractor trailers. So I think there's questions on how long it could be because they haven't been out there. But we can try to find out a lot of information between now and the time we actually get bids back for the following year. I'm asking that I can, if we go to 2 diesel in October, I put out specs for propane because we're going to need 4 buses, new buses next year for the fleet replacement. And when we get that back, say December, January, have a whole presentation at that time. And we'll check with the districts down in Montgomery County that I think was Upper Marion or Lower Marion. One of them.
Upper Moreland.
Upper Moreland, yeah.
Yeah, they converted their entire fleet to propane.
I know. I actually looked at it back in 2014. Went down Chester, and we could have had a whole fleet replaced for free propane. At that time, there's a public uproar because they didn't want their children driving on bombs, as they call it, because there was a misconception that the tanks would explode. And I've yet to hear one explode. But,
Just to clarify, for the next set of buses that you want to get bids for, you're going to get bids. You're asking the board if you want bids for propane buses
for next year.
for next year.
Because what I'm hearing from the one that did bid and the one that didn't bid is the one that did bid would bid a 2024 bus.
At
So-
that time, can you get a bid also for the diesel so we know the
Yeah.
comparison? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But, you know, I'm going to put them out early with that type of delivery for next year because I can't take delivery for next year's bus. Right now, the budget is for this year's budget is for 2 under a lease, and we have 2, I think, end of September to get to keep a 2.75% lease on buses. So
Yeah.
my motion is either reject all bids or accept the 2 diesel for the next voting meeting.
Can I just say, just in terms of the cost comparisons between diesel and the propane, as you said, 116 to 110, but that doesn't take into consideration the grant opportunities that are available.
Correct. Right.
So,
because I won't put a grant in unless you know you can get it.
yeah. So while it may appear as if they're more expensive, they actually are cheaper in the long run. And the state's been pretty good about allocating those dollars to districts that are trying to move to propane, which is a clean.
And they always do it on a need basis, but the PA drive plan has a lot more money in it than the electric grants. And like I said, the more needy districts don't have their own buses, so they can apply for grants. So that's why we were able to get it last time.
And the fact that we actually run our own fleet, we operate our own system, we buy our own buses, we're not contracting.
Correct.
I think that's our advantage too, isn't it, in terms of being able to acquire a grant?
Oh yeah, if you didn't have your own fleet, you couldn't even apply.
Dr. Herring, I guess my recommendation for this would be moving into the voting meeting with the recommendation to approve the 2 bids for the diesel buses.
Great. Is that everything, Mr. Mayor?
That's it for my report if there's no other discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mel. Policy Committee, Dr. Hamburger.
Thanks, Dr. Herring. We do have one revised policy that we want to present this evening, and I'll turn it over to Mrs. Harris.
Thank you, Dr. Hamburger. This is a quick one. It's policy 227 of controlled substances and paraphernalia. We are just updating it to align the language in there regarding off-campus activities with the language that we added for revision in policy 218, which is student discipline, which is on here for 2nd reading.
Any questions regarding the policy? Well, that's all for our portion of the agenda. Dr.
Thank you, Dr. Hamburger. Can you also do election of the PSBA officers?
Sure. You just bring that up on my screen. Okay. Every year, PSBA goes through the process of electing new officers. What happens is, in the beginning of the prior year, those PSBA members who are seeking office submit nominations to a nominating committee. That nominating committee makes recommendations and identifies preferred candidates, and they're the ones that you see on the agenda here for approval. In certain cases, candidates also receive an endorsement. You'll see that candidate listed with an asterisk next to their name, and that's a candidate who demonstrates a high degree of capability or skill as perceived by the nominating committee. So you can see on the agenda, you can see the folks that are up for consideration. There's going to be a new president, vice president, and then representatives from various sections, advisors. These are folks that advise us in our area. If you see that name, Amy Goldman at the very bottom for Radnor Township School District, Amy has been our sectional advisor. I don't think we hear from her too often, but if we have questions that board-related questions, we can rely on her. So the recommendation would be, the slate of candidates who are presented here. There really are no additional options for us to choose. We either approve or disapprove. These are all hyperlinks, so you can click on each one of the names and you can get content and information in regard to their candidacy. I think each one of them may even present a video that you can listen to their background and hear their spiel in terms of their interest in their capabilities. Also, there are 2 trustees two candidates for the PSBA Insurance Board, Kathy Swope and Roberta Marcus. Again, just two candidates, two options for us to approve. This is presented to all school districts, so it's our requirement as members of PSBA to take a vote at our next meeting. Does anybody have any questions about the process or the candidates?
Just to clarify for the benefit of the members of the audience who might not know what PSBA is, the Pennsylvania School Boards Association. It's a statewide lobbying and educational group that helps all school districts in Pennsylvania.
Thanks, John. That's a good point. Sorry about the use of acronyms.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hamburger. I appreciate you handling that.
Sure.
Okay, next we move on to public comments. We have a Mary McSturdy. Again, we'll be following policy 903 as stipulated in the beginning of the meeting. We'll be following the same policy as I mentioned in the beginning of the meeting. You have a handout? Okay. I love it. Thank you. If you can state your name and address.
My name is Mary McSturdy. My address is 1013 Pepper Ridge Drive, Exeter, Reading 19606. I wrote a quite lengthy document that I wanted to speak to. Given the length of this meeting, I think I'm probably going to be able to shorten it quite a bit and let some of you, hopefully all of you read, especially some of the environmental concerns that I've written, but I do want to speak to a few of those. The technical concerns that I have first, I think the first part has been addressed. However, solar panels don't break. Remember, they don't degrade rapidly. They chug along, and they usually give 85 to 90% of their original output well beyond their life expectancy. However, given what the gentleman that was up here said, I think if you're going to negotiate this contract with these folks, I would highly recommend getting in written maintenance plan. In other words, a document that outlines specifically what they're going to do as far as maintenance. I know they said, well, we'll be on site and we'll monitor. Well, you need to have that all in writing. That needs to be very, very specific as to the costs that you're paying for maintenance and what you get. Okay. The second item, damaged or failed solar panels are going to have to be replaced. The currently installed panels, or what they're using to install right now, is probably going to be obsolete in 3 to 5 years. If they were still here, they'd probably take me to task on that, but I don't know. But anyway, so when you replace those panels, they're not going to fail in your big array. They're not going to fail 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're going to fail 1, 10, 11, 14. They're going to be random. So in years to come, you have current technology. You're going to have to replace those panels with then current technology, because these won't be available. To do that, you're going to have to reconfigure the entire array, because you can't put new panels in the old panels. It won't work in the whole thing. So I think you need to clarify with the vendor the process to do that and what it's going to cost. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. Also, the DC to AC converters are going to have to be replaced probably roughly every 15 years. I think you need to also clarify with them what the cost is to do that, and is that included in the maintenance contract. So I just think that's something that probably should be defined. I wrote quite a bit here about environmental concerns, and I'll just highlight a few things that I think are really important. I think, as we all know, all these things are manufactured overseas. They're manufactured in Asia. I'm going to kind of summarize a lot of these points. they're manufactured with materials that are mined in Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, all those Asian countries. Even though we're not emitting carbon dioxide here, we're eliminating that by going solar. What's the carbon dioxide footprint emitted where they're being manufactured? If it's in China, it still affects us. We live on the same planet. And also, I wanted to emphasize, we talked about, is that my 4 minutes? Can I keep going? Okay. Okay. I'm going to let you read the environmental concerns, but there's one thing I would like to really emphasize. A lot of the mining of these materials are done by where you dig up the whole strip mine. Thank you. I'm just getting late. So that was done in Schuylkill County a long time ago. I don't know if any of you were around to see that. I was. What they did, they to get coal out of the ground, they just mined the whole area. Like they ripped up all of Schuylkill and Houghton County. That's what's being done in Asian countries to mine these materials, and I think things like that really need to be looked at. So I'm going to let you all read the rest of these, and maybe then you can come up with your own conclusions. However, there's one thing that I really, really want to emphasize, and maybe Mr. Fike, this might be a question for you. This is a huge contract. I think there's a tremendous amount of risk involved. I think there's so much conjecture in the future. And I don't think we, as some of you said, we don't really know. Our energy costs going up, or they're coming down. There's so many things we don't know. I think I told you the last time I spent a good part of my career as an account executive for IBM and Siemens selling to the local government. I also handled Fairfax County Schools, which is probably one of the biggest school districts in the country. I can't speak to the school district, but I can speak to all of my federal contracts. Every contract I ever had negotiated had a clause in called termination for convenience. Okay, can I ask if Mr. Fike, if you're familiar with that? The term termination for convenience?
In all of the government contracts we have, it's basically if it's cut out of the budget, we can terminate.
Okay, and there are other reasons, but in a contract this size,
I'm sorry, Mrs. McSir, are you wrapping that up?
Yeah,
Thank you. Okay.
I would just highly advise that the termination for convenience clause be added to this contract, and it can be if is terminated or they don't perform. There are a whole bunch of reasons that I think you need to have in this contract because you need to be able to get out of it if it doesn't work.
Thank you, and thank you for the information you provided. I appreciate that. Mary Beth Gardella. Please state your name and address.
I'm Mary Beth Gardella, 218 Pennsylvania Avenue, and I'm just here to speak again on the solar panels, but more specifically to the June budget meeting when we were told that, you know, the tax hike was needed because we were just covering status quo spending with some monies being taken out of the fund balance to cover the difference. And I'm just concerned that we're going to be back in June next year because we have this additional spending, if it is additional spending, and what that is going to do to the taxpayers. And how is that going to affect them and the tax hikes that we will probably be executing. So it's just with the inflation and with everything else that's going up, the burden to the taxpayers, you know, we should know ahead of time. Like it's going to cost us $650, and then it's going to cost us $679, whatever. So that means every year we're going to have to raise taxes this much in order to cover it. I think the community should know, you know, something like that. And then also I agree with Mr. Morgan on, you know, getting all these contracts, and Mr. Fiddler, you know, getting your questions answered. I think this is kind of the equivalent of we got to pass the bill in order to see what's in the bill. we have to do the contract in order to see what we actually get out of it. So I agree with you guys that, you know, your questions should be answered and it should be very clean. And then on that cost analysis, in year 21, the maintenance fee jumped up to $451,000, and that wasn't really clear as to why that went, you know, was such a big jump. So that's a question I had. And then I think that's it. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say is to Mrs. Schaefer that if I think the community needs to be involved, and it's really sad that they're not out here to do that for you. And so maybe that there's a survey or something goes out on the community page, like, hey, because I think what's going to happen is if you start putting these in, you're going to hear from the community a lot, and then it's going to be, you know, a backlash because you're going to say, well, you should have been there, and it's like, well, you know, you just probably want to get that out there before anything happens. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gardella.
Dr. Herring, I'd just like to
Sure.
respond to one thing. Ms. Gardella, I appreciate your comments, and I do just want to respond to when you're speaking about the taxes. Just, you know, I agree we have to know all the numbers, and I think that's important. I stated that earlier. I do also have to take into consideration when looking at everything that we are looking at tripling our electric bill as well. So, you know, we have to weigh both sides. I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong answer yet, but I you know, when we look at those things, if we don't do the project, we are still looking at recontracting at 3x, and that's not by our doing, that's by the increase in electric. So just something we have to look at to that one. So just bring your attention. Thank you.
I'd like to just add one thing. Mrs. Gardella and Mrs. McSurdy pretty much asked the same question. Mary asked DC to AC inverters probably need to be replaced 15 years. Mary Beth asked about the 420,000 year 20. That 420,000 is put in there because the warranty on the AC/DC converters expire in 20 years. So we put the price of what it would cost to replace them at that time. You know, hopefully you don't have to replace them, but it'd be on our nickel to replace them. So we put that in the cash flow at that time. That's why the 420. That's why there's not a 21 year another 420. It's basically a one-time cost that you'd have to pay if they go at that time.
The inverters are on a 20-year warranty based on what's in there.
That's why in 21 we put in full price of what it would cost to replace all of them.
Okay. We're going to be moving forward the following items for September 19th voting meeting. Meeting minutes. Item 3A, B, C, D, E, F, H, I, J, K, L, and M. Item 4A, B, C. Item 5A, B, C. And item 6A, as well as item 7A. At this point, are there any board members that would like to be heard?
Dr. Herring, just a question. At our next meeting, is it possible that we could add to the agenda to have an update of the bus garage? And then also at some point in the near future, I'm forgetting his name and I apologize, our operations director had done a presentation for us several months back about a new system we had voted on, and he felt as though it was going to improve efficiency, and I think it's probably been somewhere around 6 months, and I wanted to know if we could possibly get an update to hear how things are looking with that, especially since they've just gone through summer and been doing a lot of work around the district. I'd be interested to hear how things are improving. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we could get an update on where we're at with the safety and security coordinator position.
Yes, so we have 3 candidates that we're moving forward. We put together a scenario. Mrs. Skornovaki is going to be contacting them. With the start of school, it was a struggle to try and find a date where there would be a majority of people available. We did determine a date. We'll be sending out the to the board about board participation, and also encouraging you to submit any questions that you may have for the second round interviews. And then we will also be sending you the scenario that we came up with.
I'm sorry, I tuned out for 2 seconds. Sorry. Did you say, so rude of me, did you say there was a date that we're focusing on for this?
Yes. Mrs. Swernabaugh, would you like to share that?
Thank you, Dr. Haller. We're looking at September 12th, which is a Monday in the morning, and we'll be sending out invitations tomorrow once we verify with all the candidates that they're able to attend.
And I know it's hard to give a specific date, but once we've done that interview, how much time after that before we can see someone being in the building around?
I would say we would like to move fairly quickly, as you know, we discussed with the board and the panel, the proper candidate that we would like to move forward to make a decision fairly quickly.
So the goal is to get someone on the voting agenda for the 19th. They're not an educator. Typically, educators give a 60-day notice in situations like this, unless they're like in a contract situation. They would just give a regular notice of more than likely 2 weeks, unless there's something else in their workplace.
If we could just clarify, we haven't hired anyone yet, but that doesn't mean that security is not our focus. So if you can make a statement about that.
I'll grab the mic on this one. I am the district safety and security coordinator right now, and I can assure you there are a lot of things happening around safety. Right now is the start of the school year, but also over the summer as well.
Thank you.
In conjunction, by the way, with Exeter Township PD.
Wonderful. Thank you. Anyone else like to be heard?
Yes, I have, it wouldn't be a school board meeting without a dark cloud or two from me. I know that Dr. Flam and Dr. Haller are aware of this astonishing headline in the New York Times and media across the country. I'd just like to read that headline and the subhead in the first 2 paragraphs, so please bear with me. It's an academic concern. The pandemic erased 2 decades of progress in math and reading. Subhead, the results of a national test show just how devastating the last 2 years have been for 9-year-old school children, especially the most vulnerable. First paragraph. National test results released on Thursday, that's last Thursday, showed in stark terms the pandemic's devastating effects on American school children, with the performance of 9-year-olds in math and reading dropping to levels from 2 decades ago. This year, for the first time since the National Assessment of Educational Progress tests began tracking student achievement in the 1970s, 9-year-olds lost ground in math, and scores in reading fell by the largest margin in more than 30 years. I wanted the public to be aware of that, and I guess my concern is, my request would be, Dr. Haller, if we could have, hear from the administration just what you're doing, not tonight, just what you're doing to incorporate this startling news with our own test results, which I keep quoting. They're now 2 years old, but the 40% of third graders who couldn't read at grade level 2 years ago, those kids are now in 5th grade, so how are they doing? And the more than 50% of 7th graders who 2 years ago couldn't do math at grade level. They're in high school now, where math changes drastically. How are they doing? So it's a question of how do we wrap all of this together to help our kids do that?
Thank you, John. Okay, anyone else? All right, after this, the board will be meeting for an executive session to discuss personnel matters. Good evening, everyone, and hope to see you again on Monday, September 19th for a voting meeting. Hearing is now adjourned.